After losing her husband to a blizzard the previous winter, Emma Whitaker struggles to keep her small cattle ranch alive while raising her two young children, Noah, 10, and Lily, 7. Deep snow, broken fences, starving livestock, and mounting debts threaten to take everything she has left. One bitter evening, a weary drifter named Elias Boone arrives at her gate with 3 hungry orphan children he has been protecting since their parents died on a wagon trail. He owns nothing except his tools, his horse, and an unshakable work ethic. Instead of asking for charity, he makes a simple offer. Give my kids warm milk each morning, and I'll fix your ranch. Emma reluctantly agrees. Neither of them realizes that one harsh Montana winter will transform 2 broken families into one, expose the greed of a powerful land baron, and reveal that God often sends hope wearing worn-out boots instead of fine clothes. The winter of 1888 came early to the Montana Territory, and it came without mercy. By the middle of November, the mountains had disappeared behind endless curtains of snow, and the wind swept across the valleys with a howl that sounded like a lonely wolf searching for its pack. Day after day, thick gray clouds covered the sky, allowing only a few pale rays of sunlight to reach the frozen earth before darkness settled once more. On a small ranch just outside the quiet town of Red Creek, Emma Whitaker stood at the edge of her pasture with her wool coat wrapped tightly around her shoulders. Snowflakes clung to the loose strands of her chestnut hair as she counted the cattle grazing on what little grass remained beneath the snow. 23, 24, 25. She frowned. There should be 26. Her stomach tightened. Another cow was missing. Whether it had wandered away, fallen into a drift, or become another meal for the wolves that had been prowling closer each night, she didn't know. But every animal she lost brought her one step closer to losing the ranch her husband had poured his life into. She closed her eyes for a moment. "Lord," she whispered into the icy wind, "I don't know how much longer I can do this alone." The wind carried her words away. No answer came, only silence. 2 years earlier, Emma had never imagined she would be standing alone on this hill. Her husband, Thomas Whitaker, had been the strongest man she had ever known. He laughed easily, worked from sunrise until the stars appeared, and believed that every problem could be solved with hard work, patience, and faith. Whenever storms rolled across the valley, Thomas would smile and say, "Winter never stays forever. God always sends spring." But the winter before had been different. Thomas had ridden out during a blizzard to rescue 2 calves trapped near the northern fence line. He never came home. The search party found his horse 3 days later. They found Thomas the next morning beneath a snow-covered pine tree, where he had wrapped his coat around one frightened calf to keep it alive through the freezing night. The calf survived. Thomas did not. Since that day, Emma had carried not only her own grief, but the weight of an entire ranch on shoulders that never seemed strong enough. Inside the farmhouse, 10-year-old Noah struggled to split kindling with an axe nearly as tall as he was. He swung once. The log barely cracked. He tried again. Still nothing. Emma walked over and gently placed a hand on his shoulder. "You'll hurt yourself." "I have to help," Noah insisted, breathing hard. "Dad always said a ranch belongs to everyone who lives on it." Emma smiled sadly. "He did. I'll get stronger." "I know you will." Noah lowered the axe. "When?" Emma had no answer. Instead, she hugged him tightly. He was growing up too fast. Children were meant to chase butterflies, not worry about firewood and broken fences. 7-year-old Lily sat beside the fireplace, carefully stitching together one of her father's old wool socks. The stitches wandered in every direction, but she worked with complete concentration. Emma knelt beside her. "What are you making?" Lily held up the sock proudly. "A mitten." Emma couldn't help smiling. "It doesn't quite look like one." "It will." She paused before quietly asking, "Do you think Daddy can see us from heaven?" Emma swallowed the lump rising in her throat. "I believe he can." "Do you think he's proud of us?" Emma wrapped both children in her arms. "I think he thanks God for you every single day." The three of them stayed there for a long moment while the fire crackled softly beside them. Outside, the wind continued to grow louder. That afternoon, Emma pulled on her gloves and walked toward the western fence. Several posts had snapped under the weight of the snow. Without repairs, the cattle could wander into the hills where wolves hunted after sunset. She pushed a heavy cedar post upright. It slipped. She tried again. The frozen ground refused to let it sink deep enough. Frustrated, she leaned against the fence and wiped away tears before anyone could see them. "I'm trying, Thomas." Her voice barely rose above the wind. "I'm trying." The next morning brought another visitor. Unfortunately, it wasn't help. It was Calvin Pierce, the local banker. His polished black boots looked strangely out of place in the snow-covered barnyard. He removed his hat politely. "Mrs. Whitaker." Emma nodded. "Mr. Pierce, I wish this visit were easier." She already knew what he had come to say. "The payment?" He sighed. "I'm afraid so. I only need until spring. The bank has already given extensions. My herd will recover." "I hope it does." He shifted uncomfortably. "But hope isn't something the board accepts as payment." Emma looked toward her cattle. "They're healthy." "They are now. But another harsh winter." He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. "If the payments aren't caught up before April, the ranch will be auctioned." Those words struck harder than the cold. Auctioned. Everything Thomas had built, everything her children had ever known, gone. Calvin hesitated before climbing back into his wagon. "For what it's worth," he said quietly, "I'm praying for you." Emma managed a faint smile. "Thank you." As his wagon disappeared into the snowfall, she whispered, "I'll need more than prayers." Then she immediately regretted the words. She bowed her head. "Forgive me, Lord." That evening, dark clouds rolled over the mountains much faster than usual. The wind changed direction. Snow began falling sideways. Emma stepped outside and immediately recognized the signs. A blizzard. Not an ordinary one. A dangerous one. She hurried the cattle into the barn, while Noah gathered chickens, and Lily carried buckets into the shed before they froze solid. By sunset, visibility had dropped to only a few yards. The family finished supper in silence. Each gust rattled the windows. The old farmhouse creaked beneath the pressure of the storm. Lily clutched her rag doll tightly. "Will the roof stay on?" Emma forced a reassuring smile. "It always has." Though inside, she wasn't entirely certain. The fire burned low as the wind screamed through the valley. Then, a sharp knock echoed against the barn door. One knock, then another. Emma froze. Nobody traveled during storms like this. Nobody. Noah looked toward the window. Who would be outside? Emma slowly reached for Thomas's old shotgun hanging above the fireplace. She checked that it was loaded. "Stay with your sister." The knocking came again, this time louder. Emma pulled on her coat and stepped into the storm, snow immediately stinging her face. The lantern in her hand swayed wildly as she crossed the yard toward the barn. The door creaked open. A blast of freezing wind rushed inside. Standing beneath the lantern's trembling light was a tall man with a weathered face, his beard coated in ice. His coat was worn thin, his boots cracked from countless miles, and exhaustion lined every feature. Beside him huddled three frightened children, a boy of about 12, a girl close to 9, and a little boy no older than 5. Their cheeks were red with cold, and each clutched a patched blanket around their shoulders. Emma tightened her grip on the shotgun. The stranger slowly raised both hands where she could see them. His voice was calm despite the storm. "I'm not here to steal, ma'am." He glanced down at the children. "I'm only asking for one night out of the wind." Emma's eyes narrowed. "Who are you?" "My name is Elias Boone." "And these children? They're not mine by blood." He looked at each child with quiet protectiveness. "But they became my responsibility." The youngest child shivered so hard his teeth chattered. Emma looked from the children to the blizzard raging behind them. She knew what happened to people left outside on nights like this. Still, she couldn't ignore the danger of inviting strangers into her home. "What do you want?" she asked cautiously. Elias's tired eyes drifted toward the sagging roof of her barn, the broken fence disappearing beneath the snow, and the weary cattle huddled together against the wind. Then he met her gaze again. "I don't have money to pay you." He paused before speaking the words that would change both their lives. "But if you'll give my kids a warm place to sleep and a cup of milk each morning." A faint, hopeful smile crossed his weathered face. "I'll fix your ranch." Emma stared at the stranger as the wind howled between them. She had no idea that opening her door that night would become the answer to a prayer she had whispered into the lonely Montana wind only hours before. The blizzard raged through the night like an angry sea crashing against the mountains. Snow piled against the farmhouse walls until the windows looked as though they had been buried beneath white blankets. The wind whistled through every crack in the old wooden boards, making the house groan and creak. Inside, however, there was warmth. Not much, but enough. Emma placed another log on the fire while the 3 orphaned children sat quietly near the hearth, their hands stretched toward the flames. The youngest boy stared at the dancing fire as if he had not seen one in days. Lily smiled and scooted closer to him. "I'm Lily." The little boy looked at Elias before answering. Elias nodded gently. "You can tell her. My name's Ben. I'm 7. Ben's eyes grew wide. "I'm 5. Lily grinned. "Then I'm older." Ben finally smiled. It was small, but it was the first smile Emma had seen from him. Nearby, Noah watched the oldest orphan with curiosity. The boy was taller than him by a few inches, but looked thin from weeks of traveling. "I'm Noah." The boy nodded. "Jacob. You know horses?" "A little. I know a lot." Jacob gave the slightest smile. "We'll see." For the first time in many months, children's voices filled the Whitaker farmhouse. Emma hadn't realized how much she had missed hearing laughter. Supper was simple. Fresh bread, baked 3 days earlier. A pot of vegetable stew, the last of the smoked venison Thomas had prepared before he died. Emma apologized. "I'm sorry there isn't more." Elias looked genuinely surprised. "This is more than we've eaten in 2 days." Emma frowned. "You've gone 2 days without a proper meal. The children ate. And you?" "I wasn't hungry." Jacob quietly lowered his spoon. "That's not true." Elias smiled. "I said I wasn't hungry." The older boy looked at Emma. "He always says that." Emma suddenly understood. He had been giving away his own food, every chance he got. She looked at the worn patches sewn onto his coat. His gloves had been repaired so many times they barely resembled gloves anymore. His boots leaked melted snow onto the floor. Yet every child sitting beside him had dry socks. Emma looked away before he noticed the tears gathering in her eyes. After supper, Emma showed the children where they could sleep. There was only one spare bedroom. Jacob immediately spoke. "The girls can have the bed. I'll sleep in the barn." Emma shook her head. "No child sleeps in my barn." "I don't mind." "I do." She spread blankets across the floor beside the fireplace. "You'll all sleep inside." Elias spoke softly. "I'll stay in the barn with the horses." Emma looked at him. "It's too cold. The horses will settle better if someone's there." She knew enough about livestock to know he wasn't entirely wrong. "Still, take extra blankets." He nodded gratefully. "Thank you." Long after everyone had gone to sleep, Emma stood by the kitchen window. The storm had finally begun to weaken. Snow still drifted through the darkness, but the wind had lost its angry roar. She watched the faint glow of Elias's lantern inside the barn. Even now, he was checking on the horses, not because anyone asked, because someone had to. Emma whispered a quiet prayer. "Lord, I don't know who this man really is, but if you sent him, help me see it." Before dawn, while the stars still shone above the frozen valley, Elias quietly climbed out of the hayloft. He rubbed warmth into his stiff hands. His breath formed white clouds in the freezing air. He could have slept longer. No one would have blamed him. Instead, he reached for his worn leather tool bag. "Time to earn our breakfast," he whispered. The first sound Emma heard that morning wasn't the rooster. It was thunk, thunk, thunk. She sat upright in bed. Someone was chopping wood. She hurried to the window. There stood Elias. The eastern sky was only beginning to lighten, yet he had already split an enormous pile of firewood. His axe rose and fell with steady rhythm. Not hurried, not lazy, purposeful. Emma wrapped a shawl around her shoulders and stepped onto the porch. "Elias." He stopped immediately. "Morning! You should have slept." "I slept enough. It's barely daylight." He smiled. Best hours of the day. She noticed fresh stacks of neatly split wood beside the porch. "You did all this already? Figured you'd need dry wood before breakfast." Emma simply stared. By sunrise, Elias had already finished more work than most ranch hands completed before noon. He repaired the broken latch on the chicken coop, cleared snow away from the well, freed the frozen water pump, built a windbreak from fallen timber around the calf pen, replaced 2 broken fence posts, straightened the barn doors. Noah followed behind him like a shadow. "How'd you fix that?" Elias smiled. "Slow down. I want to learn." "Good." He handed Noah a hammer. "Then today you will." Their first lesson wasn't about swinging tools. It was about paying attention. Elias pointed toward the fence. "What do you see?" "It's broken." "What else?" "The posts leaning." "What else?" Noah looked harder. "The bottom's cracked." "What caused it?" "The snow." Elias shook his head. "Look closer." Noah knelt. "The wood's rotten." "There you go." Elias smiled. "If you only fix what you can see, you'll be repairing the same fence every winter." Noah nodded slowly. "So you fix the real problem." "Exactly." Emma watched from the porch. Thomas used to teach exactly like that. Patiently. Without making anyone feel foolish. For the first time since Thomas died, she heard Noah laugh while working. It caught her completely off guard. Inside the farmhouse, Lily had become fast friends with the orphaned girl. "My name's Grace," the girl said shyly. Lily showed her a small wooden doll Thomas had carved years ago. "This is Daisy." Grace smiled. "I've never had a doll. You can play with her." "What if I break it?" "Then we'll fix it." Grace looked surprised. "Really?" "Of course." Ben wandered over, carrying a little wooden horse Noah had carved. "It needs a rider." Lily picked up another tiny wooden figure. Now it has one. Soon the children were inventing adventures around the fireplace. Emma stood quietly in the kitchen doorway. The house no longer sounded empty. That afternoon, Elias inspected the barn roof. Several support beams had begun to sag under the growing weight of snow. He climbed onto the roof with nothing more than a shovel and rope. Emma rushed outside. "Get down!" "It'll collapse." "It'll definitely collapse if I don't clear it." The wind whipped around him as he carefully shoveled away heavy snow. Hours later, the roof stood stronger than before. When he climbed down, his beard was white with frost. Emma handed him a steaming mug of coffee. "You didn't have to do all this." He accepted the cup. "I said I'd fix your ranch. You've already done more in one day than I expected in a month." He shrugged. Still plenty left. Late that afternoon, a rider appeared on the distant hill. Emma recognized him immediately. Silas Granger, the wealthiest ranch owner in the valley. He slowed his horse as he looked across Emma's property. His sharp eyes moved from the repaired fences to the cleared pathways, to the stacked firewood, to the smoke rising steadily from the chimney. Then he saw Elias working beside Noah. Silas frowned. "Who's that?" His ranch foreman answered. "Don't know. He wasn't here yesterday." Silas continued watching. "I don't like surprises." He turned his horse toward town. "Find out everything." By evening, word had already begun spreading through Red Creek. Emma Whitaker had taken in a drifter. Some admired her kindness. Others questioned her judgment. At Miller's general store, one rancher shook his head. "You can't trust men who wander." Another agreed. If he was worth anything, he'd have his own ranch. A third man added, "And those children? Who knows where they came from?" The gossip traveled quickly. By sunset, nearly everyone in town had an opinion. Almost none of them had ever spoken to Elias. The following morning, Emma drove into town for supplies. Conversations stopped as she entered the store. She felt the silence immediately. Mrs. Harlan finally spoke. "I hear you've got company." Emma nodded. "A family needed shelter." One man laughed. "Family? More like trouble." Another added, "You'd better lock up anything valuable." Emma set her flour sack on the counter. "He hasn't taken a single thing." "He will." "You don't know that. We know drifters." Emma looked around the room. "No." Her voice remained calm. "You know rumors." The store fell silent. She paid for her supplies and walked out without another word. When she returned home, she found Noah and Elias kneeling beside a broken wagon wheel. "Hand me the wedge," Elias said. Noah passed it over. The wheel clicked perfectly back into place. "It works!" Elias smiled. "You fixed it." "Number. We fixed it." Emma stood quietly, watching the scene. She thought about the ugly words she'd heard in town. Then she looked at the man patiently teaching her son. He had never boasted, never complained, never asked for wages, never even asked how long he could stay. He simply worked. Still, questions lingered in her mind. Who was Elias Boone before he arrived at her gate? What had forced a man with such skill to wander across Montana in the dead of winter? And why did someone so capable carry so much sadness behind his quiet smile? As the sun disappeared behind the snow-covered mountains, Emma realized that although the ranch was beginning to come back to life, the stranger who was rebuilding it remained a mystery. The weeks passed slowly, measured not by calendars but by snowstorms. Each morning the sun climbed reluctantly above the mountains, casting pale golden light across the frozen valley before disappearing again behind heavy gray clouds. Every night, fresh snow blanketed the ranch, covering yesterday's footprints as if the land itself wanted a new beginning. For Emma Whitaker, however, something had begun to change. The ranch no longer felt like a place waiting to die. It felt alive again. Before Elias Boone arrived, every day had begun with worry. Would another fence collapse? Would the cattle survive another freezing night? Would the hay last until spring? Would the bank take everything Thomas had built? Now, every morning she woke to the steady sound of work. The ring of a hammer, the scrape of a shovel, the rhythmic chop of an axe. Not because someone ordered it, not because someone expected payment. Simply because Elias believed that if there was work to be done, it should be done well. One frosty morning, Emma stepped onto the porch with 2 steaming mugs of coffee. She found Elias kneeling beside the old windmill. Its gears had been frozen for nearly 3 winters. Thomas had planned to repair it, but there had always been another task demanding attention. Emma watched quietly as Elias carefully removed each rusted bolt, cleaned every gear with an old rag, and replaced worn wooden pegs he had carved himself. "You think it'll work?" she asked. He wiped grease from his hands. "It wants to." She laughed softly. "Machines don't have wants." He smiled. "No, but the people who built them did." He tightened one final bolt. Then he pushed the brake lever. For a long second, nothing happened. The wind caught the blades. They turned once, twice, then faster. The old windmill groaned before settling into a steady rhythm that echoed across the valley. Water began flowing into the trough below. Emma stared. It hasn't worked since Noah was little. Elias handed her the spare mug of coffee. Guess it was waiting for the right day. Word of the improvements spread quickly. Neighboring ranchers riding past slowed their horses to admire the repairs. The Whitaker fences stood straighter than ever. The cattle looked healthier despite the brutal winter. Even the horses carried more weight than they had only weeks before. One afternoon, old Mr. Cooper rode through the front gate. He removed his hat. "Afternoon, Emma." "Afternoon." He looked toward Elias, who was replacing roof shingles on the smokehouse. "That your new ranch hand?" Emma hesitated. "I suppose you could call him that." Mr. Cooper chuckled. "Best one in 3 counties." Emma smiled. "I've noticed. You planning to keep him?" Emma's cheeks warmed from something that had nothing to do with the fire nearby. "I haven't asked." Mr. Cooper nodded wisely. "Sometimes the Lord sends help before we know we need it." Before leaving, he quietly placed 2 sacks of oats beside the barn. "For your horses," Emma protested. "I can't pay for these." He smiled. "You already have." She frowned. "I have." He pointed toward Elias. "That fellow repaired my wagon axle last week. He wouldn't take a penny. So I figured I'd pay someone who would." Life inside the farmhouse changed as well. Jacob had become Noah's closest friend. The 2 boys spent every spare moment together. They repaired harnesses, practiced throwing ropes, learned to sharpen tools. One afternoon, Noah proudly held up a wooden stool they had built. "It doesn't wobble." Jacob inspected it carefully. "It leans a little." "No, it doesn't." Jacob pushed gently. The stool rocked. Noah sighed dramatically. "I almost built something perfect." Elias walked over. "There are only 2 kinds of craftsmen." "What kinds?" Noah asked. "The ones who think they're perfect, and the ones who keep learning." Noah picked up his hammer again. "I guess I'm still learning." Elias smiled. "So am I." Inside, Lily and Grace sat beside Emma, mending worn clothes. Grace struggled to thread her needle. "I can't do it." Emma gently took her hands. "You can." "It keeps slipping." "So did mine." "When?" "The first 100 times." Grace giggled. "You missed 100 times." "Probably more." Grace tried again. This time the thread slipped neatly through the tiny eye of the needle. "I did it." Emma smiled. "See?" Grace threw her arms around Emma without thinking. For a brief moment, the room fell silent. Grace pulled back, embarrassed. "I'm sorry." Emma's eyes glistened. "You never have to apologize for a hug." Grace smiled before quietly returning to her sewing. Emma turned toward the window. Her heart had begun making room for people she never expected to love. One evening, while putting away blankets in the loft above the barn, Noah noticed something tucked beneath Elias's worn saddle. It was wrapped carefully inside an old piece of cloth. Curious, he unfolded it. Inside rested a tarnished silver medal attached to a faded blue ribbon. The engraving had nearly worn away. Noah recognized enough letters to read, "For courage." He hurried downstairs. "Elias." Elias turned immediately. "What is it?" "I found this." The moment Elias saw the medal, his smile disappeared. He gently took it from Noah's hands. "I'm sorry," Noah said. "I wasn't trying to snoop." "It's all right." Emma had quietly entered the barn. "What is it?" For several long moments, Elias simply stared at the medal. Finally, he spoke. It belonged to another life. That night, after the children had fallen asleep, Emma found Elias sitting outside, beneath a sky filled with stars. The snow reflected moonlight so brightly it almost looked like daylight. She carried 2 mugs of coffee. "I thought you might still be awake." "I usually am." She handed him 1 mug. "If you don't want to talk about the medal, it's all right." He stared toward the mountains. "I've spent enough years running from the memories." Emma waited quietly. He took a slow breath. "I wasn't always a drifter." "I guessed as much." "I served as a cavalry scout." Emma nodded. "I've heard that's dangerous work." It was. I survived battles, snowstorms, hunger, long rides through country where nobody knew my name. He looked down at the coffee, warming his hands. "But none of those things broke me." Emma spoke softly. What did? His voice nearly became a whisper. Coming home. I thought my wife would be waiting. He swallowed hard. Her name was Hannah. Emma listened without interrupting. We had a little girl. Her name was Rose. A faint smile crossed his face. She had her mother's laugh. His smile slowly faded. While I was away, sickness spread through our town. There weren't enough doctors. Not enough medicine. They both died before I got home. The only sound was the distant cry of a night owl. I buried them myself. Emma felt tears filling her eyes. I'm so sorry. For a long time, Elias continued, I blamed God. I stopped praying. I stopped speaking to anyone. I wondered because I didn't know where else to go. What changed? He looked toward the farmhouse where soft candlelight glowed through the windows. A wagon train. Emma waited. They'd been attacked by bandits. There wasn't much left. The parents. He couldn't finish the sentence. But I found 4 children hiding beneath one broken wagon. Emma frowned gently. 4. There were 4. His voice grew heavy. The youngest girl died from fever before we reached the next town. He closed his eyes briefly. I couldn't save her, but I promised the others something. What? I told them, he smiled sadly, that as long as I had breath, they'd never face the world alone again. Emma looked toward the sleeping children. So you've kept that promise? I've tried. She studied the weathered man sitting beside her. So that's why you never left them. I couldn't. They already lost everyone once. I wasn't going to become another goodbye. The next Sunday morning, although there was no church nearby, Emma gathered everyone in the farmhouse parlor. Thomas had always read scripture before breakfast. After his death, she had struggled to continue. The words had reminded her too much of what she had lost. This morning she opened Thomas's old Bible. Its leather cover was cracked with age. She looked at Elias. Would you read? He hesitated. It's been a long time. So has it for me. Slowly, he opened the Bible. His eyes fell upon Psalm 46. His voice was quiet, but steady. God is our refuge and strength, a very present help in trouble. The room grew still. He continued, Therefore we will not fear, though the earth be removed, and though the mountains be carried into the midst of the sea. When he finished, no one spoke for a moment. Finally, little Ben whispered, Do you think God really stays with people when they're scared? Elias smiled warmly. I know he does. How? Because he never stopped staying with me. He looked around the room filled with children, warmth, and hope. Even when I stopped noticing, Emma quietly bowed her head. Thank you, Lord. Not everyone celebrated the Whitaker Ranch's recovery. Across the valley, Silas Granger stood inside his large office, overlooking hundreds of acres of land. His foreman entered, carrying a folded piece of paper. We found out who the drifter is. Silas unfolded it. As he read, his confident expression slowly disappeared. Elias Boone. He repeated the name quietly. I remember him. The foreman looked surprised. You know him? Silas nodded. Too well. Years earlier, Elias had worked for one of the largest ranches in Wyoming. When dishonest managers had stolen wages from ranch hands and cheated neighboring families out of grazing rights, Elias had gathered evidence and exposed the entire operation. Several powerful men had lost their fortunes because of one honest cowboy who refused to stay silent. Silas crumpled the paper in his fist. If Boone stays with Emma, everything changes. The foreman frowned. What do you want us to do? Silas walked to the window, staring toward the distant Whitaker Ranch, barely visible beneath the snow. His voice turned cold. Find something. Anything. I don't care if it's true. I want the town to stop trusting him. And if rumors aren't enough, he paused, we'll give them something worse. Outside, the wind swept across the valley once more. But this time, the greatest danger to the Whitaker Ranch would not come from winter. It would come from the darkness growing in the heart of a man determined to claim everything Emma still had left. By the first week of January, the people of Red Creek had stopped asking whether winter would get worse. Instead, they asked how much worse it could become. Every morning, another layer of snow covered the valley. The fences that divided one ranch from another had nearly disappeared beneath towering white drifts. The river that wound through the countryside had frozen so solid that children could have walked across it if their parents had dared to let them. The mountains stood silent beneath thick blankets of snow, beautiful from a distance, but deadly to anyone caught unprepared. Old ranchers shook their heads whenever they met in town. "I've lived here 40 years," one said. "I've never seen a winter like this." Another answered quietly, "I have. When I was a boy. And we buried a lot of good people before spring." Those words spread through the valley faster than the wind. Fear settled over every ranch. At the Whitaker Ranch, however, the days still began before sunrise. Elias refused to let the weather decide whether work would be done. He stood in the barn fastening his heavy coat, while Noah struggled to button his own. "I'm coming with you." Elias smiled. "Not today." "I can shovel." "I know." "I can carry hay." "I know." "I can help." Elias rested a hand on the boy's shoulder. "And today your job is even more important." "What is it?" "You stay with your mother." Noah frowned. "That isn't real work." "It is. The strongest man isn't always the one holding a shovel. Sometimes he's the one protecting his family." Noah looked disappointed, but he nodded. "I understand." Elias smiled. "I knew you would." Outside, the cold bit through every layer of clothing. Even breathing hurt. The cattle crowded together near the windbreak Elias had built weeks earlier. Emma watched from the porch. "If you hadn't built those walls, they'd already be gone." Elias simply nodded. "We still need more hay. I counted enough for maybe 12 days. We'll make it last." Emma sighed. "I've been trying to make everything last since Thomas died." Elias looked across the pasture. "Sometimes surviving isn't about having more. It's about wasting less." Emma knew he wasn't talking only about hay. By noon, dark clouds rolled over the mountains. The air became strangely still. Not a single bird flew overhead. Even the horses grew restless. Old Molly, Thomas's favorite mare, pawed nervously at the frozen ground. Elias noticed immediately. He frowned. "That's not good." Emma stepped beside him. "What is it?" "The animals know before we do." She looked toward the mountains. "You think another storm?" He didn't answer immediately. Then he spoke quietly. "Not just another storm. A blizzard. Worse than the last one." Emma's heart sank. How much worse? Elias looked at the dark horizon. "If I'm right..." "We've only got a few hours." Everyone began working, without another word. Jacob and Noah stacked extra firewood on the porch. Grace and Lily filled every bucket, kettle, and wash basin with fresh water before the pump froze. Ben carried kindling back and forth until his tiny arms grew tired. Emma prepared soup that could feed everyone for several days. Elias inspected every building one final time. He reinforced the barn doors, added ropes to support weak beams, covered broken windows with heavy blankets, moved every animal into the strongest shelter. As the first snowflakes began falling, everything that could be done had been done. Now all they could do was wait. The blizzard arrived just before sunset. The wind struck the ranch like a giant hammer. Snow exploded across the fields. Within minutes, the world disappeared. The barn stood only 20 yards from the house, yet Emma could barely see it through the white wall outside. The windows rattled violently. The chimney groaned. The entire farmhouse trembled. Little Ben climbed into Grace's lap. "Is the house going to blow away?" Grace looked toward Emma. Emma forced a smile. "No, but it's loud." "I know." Elias placed another log on the fire. Storms make a lot of noise. They like people to think they're stronger than they are. Ben looked at him. "Are they?" "No." "Why not?" "Because storms always end." Hours passed. The wind only became stronger. Suddenly, crack! The sound echoed across the ranch. Emma jumped to her feet. What was that? Elias was already opening the door. The barn. Before anyone could stop him, he disappeared into the blizzard. Emma rushed after him. Elias. The wind swallowed her voice. She could barely see her own hands. The barn roof had partially collapsed beneath the weight of the snow. One corner sagged dangerously. Inside, frightened cattle pushed against one another. A young calf cried helplessly beneath a fallen support beam. Without hesitation, Elias crawled through the opening. Easy! It's all right! The frightened animals slowly settled as he spoke. Emma reached the doorway. What do I do? Bring lanterns. Noah! Jacob! Rope! The boys sprinted through the snow. Within minutes, everyone had a job. Emma held the lantern. Jacob tied support ropes. Noah shoveled snow away from the weakened wall. Even little Ben carried handfuls of loose boards toward the doorway. Grace and Lily wrapped frightened calves in old blankets. For nearly 3 hours, the family fought the storm together. Finally, the last trapped calf stumbled free. The barn remained standing. Barely. Everyone collapsed onto hay bales, exhausted. Emma looked around. We did it. Elias shook his head. We're not finished. What else? The fences. She stared at him. In this storm. If they disappear under the snow, the cattle will wander the moment this wind stops. Emma wanted to argue, but she knew he was right. Just after midnight, the wind eased enough for Elias and Noah to inspect the northern pasture. Emma grabbed Noah's arm. No! You stay here. I can help. I said no. Noah looked at Elias. I'll stay close. Elias nodded. I won't let him out of my sight. Emma reluctantly agreed. Come straight back. We will. The lantern barely lit the path ahead. Snow reached their knees. Each step felt heavier than the last. They found several fence posts leaning beneath massive drifts. Working quickly, Elias tied temporary braces around them. Noah held the lantern steady. I can't feel my fingers. Wiggle them. It hurts. Good. That means they're waking up. Noah laughed weakly. I don't think frostbite's supposed to be funny. It isn't. But giving up won't warm you either. Then they heard it. A frightened calf, crying somewhere beyond the fence. Noah pointed. There! Without thinking, he climbed over the snowbank. Noah! The snow beneath him suddenly gave way. The boy vanished. Help! His cry echoed through the darkness. Elias dropped the rope and rushed forward. A narrow ravine lay hidden beneath the snow. Noah clung desperately to an icy tree root halfway down the slope. Elias! I'm here. I can't climb. You don't have to. Elias quickly tied one end of the rope around a sturdy pine tree. The other end he secured around his own waist. Then, without hesitation, he lowered himself into the ravine. The icy walls crumbled beneath his boots. One wrong step, and both of them would fall deeper. Noah, look at me. I'm scared. I know, but listen carefully. I'm going to reach you. When I do, you hold on to me. Don't let go. Noah nodded through tears. I won't. Slowly, painfully, Elias stretched one arm toward the boy. Their fingertips touched. Then their hands locked together. I've got you. Using every ounce of strength left in his exhausted body, Elias pulled Noah against his chest. Then, inch by inch, they climbed back toward the surface. By the time they reached solid ground, both of them were shaking uncontrollably. Emma burst through the farmhouse door moments later after hearing the horses. Noah! The boy threw himself into her arms. I'm okay. She held him tightly before turning toward Elias. Only then did she notice something wrong. His face had turned pale. His lips were slightly blue. His hands trembled violently. Elias? I'm fine. He took one step, then another. Suddenly his knees buckled. Jacob caught him before he hit the ground. Elias. Emma touched his hands. They were ice cold. Too cold. Frostbite. She looked at Jacob. Help me. Together they carried him inside. For the next 3 days, Elias drifted in and out of fever. Emma barely left his bedside. She changed cool cloths on his forehead, wrapped fresh blankets around him, prepared hot broth whenever he was awake enough to eat. Several times he murmured names she had never heard before. Hannah. Rose. Then softly, I'm sorry. Emma realized he was dreaming about the family he had lost. One evening, while the children slept, she sat beside his bed, holding a small oil lamp. She looked at the worn lines on his face, the scar across one hand, the calluses earned from years of honest labor. This man had walked into her life carrying almost nothing, yet somehow, he had given her children laughter, given her ranch another chance, given her hope. She quietly folded her hands. Lord, her voice trembled. When Thomas died, I thought you had forgotten us. She looked toward the sleeping man. But maybe you were preparing help before I even knew I needed it. A tear rolled down her cheek. If this man is part of your plan, please spare him. I don't want my children to lose another father. The words escaped before she realized what she had said. She covered her mouth. Her heart beat faster. She hadn't meant to speak those words aloud. Or perhaps she had. On the morning of the 4th day, sunlight poured through the farmhouse window for the first time in nearly 2 weeks. The storm had finally passed. The valley sparkled beneath fresh snow. Emma carried another bowl of broth into Elias's room. As she set it down, she noticed his eyes were open. He smiled weakly. I must have worried everyone. Emma smiled through tears. You certainly gave us something to pray about. Elias looked around the room. How's the ranch? Emma laughed softly. The ranch survived. She reached for his hand. So did you. Neither of them pulled away. For a quiet moment, neither spoke. Outside, the first rays of winter sunshine spread across the Whitaker ranch. The storm had ended, but far beyond the snow-covered fields, another storm was already gathering, one born not of wind and ice, but of greed, deception, and a man named Silas Granger, who had no intention of letting Emma Whitaker keep the future she and Elias had fought so hard to save. When the blizzard finally released its grip on the valley, Red Creek emerged from the snow like a town waking from a long and terrible dream. Ranchers dug their barns out of drifts taller than a man. Broken fences appeared beneath melting snow. Wagons that had disappeared for weeks were uncovered one shovel at a time. At the Whitaker Ranch, the damage was heavy, but the ranch still stood. That alone felt like a miracle. The price of survival. 3 days after Elias recovered enough to walk outside, Emma sat at the kitchen table with her account book open. She counted the remaining money twice. Then a third time. It did not change. $18.47. That was all she had left. Spring was still weeks away. Seed would need to be purchased, equipment repaired, taxes paid. She closed the ledger and pressed a hand to her forehead. Elias stepped into the kitchen, carrying a bundle of repaired harness straps. He noticed her expression immediately. Bad? Emma managed a tired smile. I was just figuring out how much winter cost us. Elias set the straps down. And? She looked at the ledger. More than we have. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Elias said quietly, We'll find a way. Emma appreciated the confidence, but numbers did not care about confidence. Before she could answer, hoofbeats sounded outside. Her stomach tightened. Silas Granger arrives. Silas Granger rode into the yard with 2 men behind him. He dismounted slowly, brushing snow from his expensive coat. Everything about him looked polished. The silver watch chain across his vest, the spotless gloves, the confident smile that never quite reached his eyes. Emma stepped onto the porch. Mr. Granger, Mrs. Whitaker. His gaze drifted briefly toward Elias, standing near the barn. I see your drifter survived the storm. Elias said nothing. Granger pulled a folded document from inside his coat. I've come regarding your debt. Emma's heart sank. I have an agreement with the bank until April. Granger smiled. Ordinarily, yes. However, the bank has transferred your note to me. Emma stared at him. Transferred. Perfectly legal. He unfolded the papers. According to these records, you owe not only the original loan, but accumulated penalties, interest adjustments, and winter recovery fees. Emma took the document. Her hands began to tremble. The amount listed was nearly 3 times what she actually owed. This is impossible. The paperwork says otherwise. Thomas never signed anything like this. Granger shrugged. Then perhaps he failed to read the terms. Elias stepped forward. Let me see that. Granger's smile faded slightly. This is between the widow and her creditor. It's between the truth and a lie. The yard grew quiet. Granger's eyes narrowed. Careful, Boone. I know exactly who you are. Elias met his stare. Then you know I can read forged numbers when I see them. For the first time, Granger's confidence wavered. A threat in plain sight. Granger folded the papers sharply. You have 10 days to pay the full amount. If you cannot, he looked across the ranch. I take possession. Emma's voice hardened. You planned this. I planned for business. He mounted his horse. And Mrs. Whitaker. His gaze flicked toward Elias. Be careful whom you trust. Some men bring trouble wherever they go. Then he rode away. Snow crunched beneath the hooves until the sound disappeared. The hidden box. That evening, Emma sat silently at the table. Noah watched her with worried eyes. Are we going to lose the ranch? Emma forced herself to answer honestly. I don't know. The room fell quiet. Then Elias spoke. Thomas kept records, didn't he? Emma nodded. Always. Where? In the attic, I think. Then that's where we start. By lantern light, they climbed into the dusty attic. Boxes filled the space. Old tools, winter blankets, Thomas's saddle, and stacks of papers tied with twine. Hours passed. Then Jacob called out, Over here! He held up a small cedar chest. Inside were ledgers, receipts, contracts, and letters written in Thomas's careful hand. Elias opened the first ledger. His eyes sharpened. Emma, look at this. One receipt showed the original loan amount. Another showed every payment Thomas had made. A third listed the exact interest rate. None of the mysterious fees from Granger's document existed. Then Elias found something even more important. A letter from the bank manager, dated 6 months before Thomas died. Your loan has been brought fully current. Emma stared at the words. He lied. Elias nodded. And he didn't expect you to have proof. The town council. 2 days later, the entire town gathered in the council hall. Granger stood confidently beside his attorney. Emma sat with Elias and the children behind her. Many townspeople whispered among themselves. Some expected the widow to lose. Others simply wanted to see what would happen. Councilman Reed struck the gavel. Mr. Granger, present your claim. Granger handed over the debt papers. Mrs. Whitaker has failed to satisfy her obligations. Under the terms of this agreement, the ranch belongs to me. The council examined the documents. Then Elias stood. May I speak? Granger objected immediately. He's not family. Emma rose. He represents my interests. The councilman nodded. Proceed. Elias placed Thomas's ledgers on the table. These are the original records. One by one, he presented receipts, payment records, and the bank manager's letter. The room grew increasingly quiet. Then he pointed to Granger's document. Notice the ink. The council leaned closer. The original figures were altered. He pointed again. And this signature was copied from an earlier contract. Granger's attorney shifted uneasily. Elias wasn't finished. I also have testimony. The witnesses. To Emma's surprise, old Mr. Cooper stood. I was present when Thomas made his last payment. Another rancher rose. Granger tried the same thing with my grazing lease. Then another. Boone repaired my wagon during the storm. He never asked for money, but he did ask questions about land records. More voices joined. Men and women whom Elias had quietly helped during the winter stepped forward one after another. Granger's confidence began to crumble. Councilman Reed turned to the attorney. "Can you explain the altered figures?" The attorney swallowed. "I was not aware of any alterations," Granger snapped. "This is a misunderstanding." Elias looked directly at him. "No, it's greed." Judgment. The council withdrew briefly. When they returned, every person in the hall stood silent. Councilman Reed spoke clearly. "The claim against Mrs. Whitaker is denied." Emma exhaled sharply. Furthermore, the council finds evidence of fraudulent alteration of financial records. Murmurs spread through the room. Mr. Granger's claim is void, and the matter will be referred for further investigation. Granger's face turned red. He pointed at Elias. "This is your doing." Elias answered calmly. "No, it's the truth's doing." A new kind of victory. Outside the council hall, Emma finally let herself breathe. She looked at Elias. "You saved the ranch." He shook his head. "Thomas saved it. He kept the records. I just found them." Emma's eyes filled with tears. "Then thank you for looking." For a moment, they stood together in the cold afternoon sunlight, while townspeople passed by, offering congratulations. Noah tugged on Elias's sleeve. "Does this mean we get to stay?" Elias smiled. "Looks that way." Lily threw her arms around Emma. "We still have our home." Emma held her tightly. "Yes, sweetheart. We still have our home." The valley changes. As they rode back toward the ranch, Emma noticed something she had not seen in a long time. Neighbors waved. People who had once whispered about the drifter now tipped their hats respectfully to Elias. The valley had changed, not because a wealthy man had spoken, because an honest one had stood firm when it mattered most. And as the sun dipped behind the mountains, painting the snow in shades of gold and rose, Emma realized that winter had given her something far more valuable than a repaired ranch. It had given her someone she could trust with her future. Someone who fought for her family as fiercely as if it were already his own. Spring was coming. And for the first time since Thomas died, Emma was no longer facing it alone. The first signs of spring came quietly. One morning, Emma stepped onto the porch before sunrise and noticed that the air no longer carried the sharp bite of winter. Instead, it smelled of damp earth and pine. Tiny drops of water fell from the edge of the roof as the morning sun melted the last sheets of ice. She smiled. Winter was finally letting go. Across the pasture, patches of green grass pushed through the melting snow. The creek, silent for months beneath a blanket of ice, began to sing again as water rushed over smooth stones. Emma closed her eyes and breathed deeply. It felt as though the entire valley was taking its first full breath after holding it all winter long. A ranch reborn. The Whitaker Ranch looked nothing like it had only a few months earlier. The broken fences stood tall and straight. The repaired barn had weathered the harshest winter anyone could remember. The windmill turned steadily, filling fresh water troughs. Healthy calves stumbled through the pasture on uncertain legs while their mothers grazed peacefully. The chickens wandered freely around the yard, scratching happily in the soft earth. Noah leaned against the corral fence, watching the newest calf take its first shaky steps. "Come on," he encouraged with a grin. "You can do it." The little calf wobbled, nearly falling before finding its balance. Elias chuckled. "Looks familiar." Noah laughed. "What do you mean?" "That's exactly how you looked the first time I handed you a hammer." Noah rolled his eyes. "I wasn't that bad." Jacob walked over carrying a bucket. "You hit your own boot." "I did not." "You did. It slipped." Elias smiled. Good craftsmen remember their mistakes. The boys laughed together as they carried feed toward the barn. Emma watched them from the porch. Noah's laughter came easily now. It had become a sound she heard every day. For that alone, she thanked God. A mother's joy. Inside the farmhouse, Lily and Grace carefully arranged wildflowers they had gathered near the creek. Bluebells, yellow buttercups, tiny white blossoms that had somehow survived beneath the snow. Ben carried in another handful. "I found more," Grace smiled. "Those are dandelions. They're flowers." "They are." Lily placed them proudly into the vase. Emma watched the children from the kitchen. Only months earlier, Grace barely spoke above a whisper. Ben had been frightened of every loud sound. Now they chased one another through the yard, laughing until they fell into the grass. The farmhouse that had once echoed with silence now overflowed with life. Emma whispered softly, "Thank you, Lord." The town's gratitude. A week later, the people of Red Creek gathered at the Whitaker Ranch. Old Mr. Cooper arrived first, with 2 fresh pies balanced carefully in his wagon. Mrs. Harlan brought baskets of homemade bread. Several ranchers carried smoked meat, fresh vegetables, and sacks of seed. Children ran through the fields, while neighbors greeted one another with warm smiles. Noah looked around in amazement. "What's all this for?" Mr. Cooper winked. "We're celebrating." "What? You?" Noah blinked. "Me?" Mr. Cooper laughed. "All of you." He looked toward Emma and Elias. This ranch reminded this valley what neighbors are supposed to be. One by one, the townspeople shared stories. A rancher whose wagon Elias had repaired stood first. "If Boone hadn't stopped to fix my axle, my wife would have been stranded in the storm." Another man spoke. "He helped me rebuild my barn after mine collapsed." Mrs. Harlan smiled at Emma. "And your children reminded us that kindness still lives in this valley." Emma felt tears filling her eyes. She had spent so many months believing she was alone. Now she looked around and realized she had an entire community standing beside her. The surprise. As the celebration drew to a close, Emma quietly slipped away into the farmhouse. She returned carrying a small wooden box. Everyone fell silent. She walked toward Elias. "I have something for you." He looked puzzled. She opened the box. Inside lay the original deed to the Whitaker Ranch. The paper had yellowed with age. Thomas's signature remained clearly visible. Emma held it out to Elias. "This belongs to you." He stared at her. "No, it belongs to your family." She shook her head gently. "The day you stood at my barn door, you asked for nothing except a little milk for those children. You never asked for wages. You never asked for ownership. You never asked for recognition." Her voice trembled. "But every board you've nailed, every fence you've repaired, every calf you've saved, every lesson you've taught my son, every bedtime story you've read to these children. You gave this ranch more than your hands. You gave it your heart." She pressed the deed into his hands. "So today, I'm giving you part of mine." The entire gathering watched in silence. Elias looked down at the document. Then slowly, he closed the box and handed it back. Emma frowned. "You don't want it?" He smiled softly. "I do. But not this way." He looked into her eyes. "A deed can make a man an owner." He gently took her hand. "But only love can make him family." A cowboy's question. The valley grew completely still. Even the children sensed something special was happening. Elias removed his weathered hat. For a long moment, he simply looked at Emma. His voice was quiet. "When Hannah died, I believed my life had ended with hers." Emma squeezed his hand. "When Thomas died, I believed mine had ended too." He nodded. "God had different plans." She smiled through tears. "Yes, he did." Elias took a slow breath. "I came to your ranch with 3 hungry children. I thought I was asking for help." He glanced toward Noah, Lily, Jacob, Grace, and Ben playing nearby. "But instead, I found a home." His eyes returned to Emma. "I found hope. I found laughter. I found faith again." Then, before anyone expected it, He knelt on one knee. The children gasped. Emma covered her mouth. Elias. He looked up at her. Emma Whittaker. I don't have riches. I don't own fine land. My coat has more patches than cloth. My hands are rough. And I still carry scars from a life I cannot change. He smiled gently. But if you'll have me, I promise to spend every sunrise thanking God for you. I promise to love Noah and Lily as though heaven had entrusted them to me. I promise never to stop protecting this family. He paused, then asked the question every heart present had been waiting to hear. Will you marry me? Tears streamed freely down Emma's cheeks. She looked toward the sky for a brief moment. Then she whispered, Thank you, Thomas. The wind stirred gently through the cottonwood trees. In her heart, she remembered her husband's final words before the blizzard that had taken his life. Winter never stays forever. She smiled. No, it doesn't. She looked back at Elias. Her answer came without hesitation. Yes, with all my heart. Yes. A new family. The children erupted with cheers. Lily threw her arms around Emma. Jacob hugged Elias tightly. Ben shouted, Does this mean we're all staying together? Elias laughed. Yes. Grace wiped tears from her face. I've always wanted a real family. Emma knelt before the 3 orphaned children. You already are family. Grace hugged her first. Then Jacob. Then little Ben. Noah smiled at Elias. So, what do I call you now? Elias laughed. You can call me whatever feels right. Noah hesitated, then quietly said, Can I call you Pa? For a moment, no one spoke. Elias's eyes filled with tears. He placed both hands on Noah's shoulders. I'd be honored. Emma looked away briefly, overcome with emotion. She had wondered for months if Noah would ever smile the way he had before Thomas died. Now she had her answer. A wedding beneath the open sky. 2 weeks later, under a bright blue Montana sky, the people of Red Creek gathered once more. There were no grand decorations, no expensive clothes, no fancy banquet. The ceremony took place beneath the large cottonwood tree overlooking the ranch. Wildflowers lined the simple wooden aisle. Mr. Cooper played an old fiddle while Mrs. Harlan led the children in singing Amazing Grace. The local pastor opened his worn Bible. We gather today to celebrate not only a marriage, but the faithfulness of God. Emma walked toward Elias, wearing a simple cream-colored dress sewn by Mrs. Harlan and Grace. Noah proudly carried the wedding rings. Lily scattered wildflowers before her mother. Jacob stood beside Elias as his best man. Ben clutched a tiny bouquet, almost too large for his little hands. The vows were simple, honest, filled with gratitude. When the pastor declared, What God has joined together, let no one separate, the valley erupted in applause. The gift of spring. That evening, after the celebration ended, the newly blended family climbed the hill overlooking the ranch. The setting sun painted the fields in shades of gold. Cattle grazed peacefully below. Smoke curled gently from the farmhouse chimney. Children laughed as they chased one another across the meadow. Elias slipped his arm around Emma. Beautiful, she smiled. The ranch? He shook his head. Our family. They stood quietly for a while. Finally, Elias spoke. I still remember the first words I said to you. Emma laughed softly. I do too, he smiled. I came asking only for milk. She leaned her head against his shoulder. And God gave us a family. They bowed their heads together. Elias prayed, Father in heaven, thank you for carrying us through the coldest winter of our lives. Thank you for teaching us that hope can bloom even after great sorrow. Help us never to forget that every blessing we have comes from your hand. Make this home a place where strangers find welcome, children find love, and your name is honored in every season. Amen. Everyone answered together, Amen. The sun slowly disappeared beyond the Montana mountains, but no one hurried to leave. There was no need. They were already home. Epilogue. Hope beyond winter. Years later, travelers passing through Red Creek often stopped at the Whitaker Ranch. Some came to buy cattle, some came seeking work. Others simply needed a warm meal and a safe place to rest. No one who knocked on the Whitaker door was ever turned away. Above the fireplace in the farmhouse hung a simple wooden plaque carved by Noah when he became a grown man. It read, "Give what you have with love, and God will do the rest." Visitors often asked about its meaning. Emma would smile at Elias across the room. He would grin beneath his silvering beard and answer with the same words that had changed both their lives many years before. "I only asked for milk." And Emma would always finish the story with joyful eyes. "But the Lord gave